Today, we're gonna build a mid-range gaming system, but we're gonna do it on a budget. And you might be surprised how this turns out. Stay tuned. So, I had a comment recently from someone who said they wanted to build a gaming system, but their budget was $200. And you know, I told them that unfortunately, the minimum price that they're gonna pay for a GPU in a gaming system is gonna be over $200. But it got me to thinking, how cheap could I build a reasonably competent gaming system? And it was that question that led to this video, where we're gonna do exactly that. This isn't a budget gaming system, but rather a mid-tier gaming system on a budget. I guess technically that would make it a budget gaming system. But wait, this system is not going to perform like a budget system. But first, I gotta pay some bills because I had to buy all these parts out of my own pocket. So, check out today's sponsor. Is your copy of Windows 10 unactivated? Well, it doesn't have to be, because with today's sponsor, VIP SCD Key, you can get a valid Windows 10 license for under $20. Stop dealing with that stupid watermark on the desktop, the valid license for Windows 10. Also, with an activated copy of Windows 10, you can upgrade to Windows 11 for free. Just go to the link in the description below and pick up a valid Windows 10 license key. During checkout, use the code CYBERCPU for a 25% discount. Once you have your key, go to your activation settings in Windows 10 and click on the link that says Change Product Key. Enter the product key you just purchased and hit Activate. Now you don't have to deal with that stupid watermark that come with running an unactivated copy of Windows 10. Now, on with the video. So, I've built budget gaming systems on this channel before, and in the end, they were budget gaming systems. They performed exactly how you would expect them to perform. But that's not what I wanted to do this time. I wanted to build an upgradable and future-proof gaming system, but not have to refinance my house to do it. And believe it or not, it's 100% possible. So my budget for this build was $800. So let's go through the parts and see how close I came. Now, the crown jewel of every gaming system is the GPU. But we're gonna set this one aside for a moment and go over the other parts, because quite honestly, this GPU is the reason why we're able to come in at our budget on this system, but we're gonna talk about that a little bit later. So we're gonna start with the platform first. This system is gonna be based on the 7th generation Ryzen 7600. Now the CPU cost me $182. Now you might think that that was stupid because you can get a 7600X for $197. For just $15 more, you could get a considerably faster CPU. I mean, the base clock on a 7600X is almost a gigahertz higher than the 7600. However, the reason I chose the 7600 was because this, for one, is going to be way more processor than we're going to need in the first place. And for two, the 7600X doesn't come with a cooler and has a considerably higher TDP. And the cooler that would be required, I think, would raise our budget over the benefit that it would provide. Also, the 7600X, while being a faster processor, according to benchmarks, didn't perform that much better in gaming. Now, if you stuck a 4090 in this thing and played all your games at 4K with the highest settings available, you might be CPU bound. In the situation, might get a little bit better with a 7600X. But for what we're doing, the 7600 is going to be great. And I'll kind of keep us within our budget. Now, once we get the system built and go through the benchmarks, we'll find out if that was a stupid decision or not. Now, the next part that we're gonna need is a motherboard. Now, obviously, if we're gonna stay under our $800 budget, we're not gonna be running a flagship board. Also, a 7600X doesn't need a flagship board. So I went with the ASRock B650M PRO. And this is a pretty affordable motherboard on the AM5 platform, coming in at $135. The one I'm using is the non-Wi-Fi version, but if you want the Wi-Fi version, it's about $15 more. And for me, it was more important to save the $15 than have Wi-Fi. But upgrading to Wi-Fi later will cost you more. So if you need it, then I would buy the Wi-Fi version. Now, this is a pretty good board for the price. Not only is it decent looking with the white silkscreen pattern across the board that's gonna reflect great with RGB, but it also has coolers on the power delivery and a built-in back panel. It also comes with 3 NVMe slots as well as an M2 slot for a Wi-Fi card. which will of course be occupied with a Wi-Fi card if you get the Wi-Fi version. But if you don't, you could always add a Wi-Fi card later. But again, it's going to cost you more than the difference. This board also has 4 DDR5 DIMM slots that support a maximum of 128 gigs of RAM. Way more than we're going to be running today. Also, one feature that I really liked about this board is that it supports both the 12 volt RGB and the 5 volt addressable RGB. The fact that it has both gives you a lot more options. And finally, the fact that it's a Micro-ATX motherboard, it kind of gives us a lot more options when it comes to the affordable cases class. Now, I've been using ASRock for quite some time. This company started out as a budget line of Asus, but at some point they broke away into their own company. And I switched to ASRock quite a few years ago because I kept having a lot of weird problems with Asus motherboards. Not to mention a really frustrating situation with the RMA department, and I eventually just gave up on them. But moving on, the next part we needed was memory. Now, I've been a G.Skill fan for quite a while, but recently I've had a pretty high failure rate with G.Skill DIMMs. So for this system, I'm switching to CORSAIR with a CORSAIR Vengeance 6000 megahertz kit. Now, with this board right here, I'm using 32 gigs, but the only reason I went with 32 gigs is because all these components, once I'm done with this video, are going to upgrade my system back here, and I use 32 gigs to edit. If I was recommending this system to someone that just wanted a gaming system, then you could probably get away with 16 gigs. However, no matter which one you use, the 32 gig kit cost $100, and the 16 gig kit, I think, was about $70. So when you think about it, for such a small price difference, it might be worth it just getting the 32 gig kit. Now, for storage, I'm using a Gen 3 NVMe drive. This is kind of a shortcut right here to save a little bit of money so we can keep within our budget. The drive I went with is a Silicon Power 1 terabyte drive. I've been using Silicon Power drives for quite some time, and I've had pretty good luck with them. Now, it's probably going to be a little bit small for a gaming system, being that games are huge these days. But the nice thing about this motherboard right here is that, like I said before, it has 3 NVMe slots. You can always add another NVMe drive in the future if you run out of space on your 1 terabyte drive. Also, I don't think running a Gen 3 drive is going to affect us much in gaming. But by doing this, or by going with this drive, we were able to pick it up for $54. That's actually a pretty good deal. Now, obviously, we need something for all these parts to go into. I mean, we could just set them up on our desk and run it without a case, but there's some pretty good, reasonable ways that we can save money on getting a decent case. The one I went with in this build is going to be an Antec NX200. Now, this isn't the most flashy case in the world, but it comes with everything you need, and it's a very well configured case for the price. It's a great case for cooling, especially if you're using air cooling, because it has a lot of ventilation in it, and it also has enough space if you'd like to use up to a 240 millimeter AIO. But since we're on a budget, we're going to be using the stock AMD cooler. Also, this thing comes in an RGB version that unfortunately I didn't notice at the time that I bought this thing because it's exactly the same price. And I really wish I would have noticed because the RGB version is kind of better than this one in a couple of different ways. For one, this one only has a single 120 millimeter Antec fan in the back. But the RGB version comes with an RGB 120 in the back and 2 RGB 120s in the front. But, you know, if I were to do it again, I would definitely get the RGB version. But you always live and learn, right? And also, this case right here comes with a tempered glass side panel that is actually hinged, so you can just open it up. Unlike some of the other cases that come with the plexiglass side panel that get scratched up almost immediately. And best of all, if you look down here at the bottom, this case here has a power supply basement to make cable management a lot easier. To be honest with you, I don't know why all cases don't come with power supply basements. They really should. But speaking of power supply basements, we're going to need a power supply to put in there. So in this case, unfortunately, this case does not come with a power supply, which is actually a good thing because most power supplies that come with cases aren't the best. And we're going to need something a little bit better than a standard power supply. And that's why I went with this one here, which is a Thermaltake 80 plus 700 watt supply. This power supply is a great deal at $55. and it has enough power to be able to support a pretty decent GPU. Unfortunately though, it doesn't have a lot of the higher end features like modular cables and things like that, but at least the cables are black and not ketchup and mustard cables, and for the most part, it's a really decent power supply for the price. Now finally, the most important part of this build that we need to talk about is the GPU. You can easily blow up your budget with a GPU. And as you can probably tell, this system is not going to be running a 1660. We need something a little bit better if we are truly going to be building a mid-range gaming system. So for the GPU, I'm going with an EVGA RTX 2080 XC Ultra Gaming. Now, when this card was released, this was about $1,000 card, and that was if you could find it in the first place. I saw these cards going for in the neighborhood of $2,000 during the GPU shortage. Although, we didn't pay anywhere near that price for this one. I paid considerably less for this card, and that's the reason why this build was even possible. You see, the 2080 is 2 generations back, and now that we're clear of the GPU shortage, people are upgrading their GPUs. So they're trying to get some of the money back for their old ones because of that, eBay is absolutely inundated with 2080s right now. Because there are so many of them, the prices are really good. In fact, I bought this one right here for $219. At the time of making this video, the RTX 4060 is currently selling for $300. So the lowest tier 40 series is almost $80 higher than the highest tier 20 series. And the 20 series cards are still excellent cards. So I think this is going to be a no-brainer. But you have to be comfortable purchasing a used GPU. This one was marked as eBay refurbished, whatever that means. However, based on the pictures, it looked like it was in great shape. And it kind of paid off because it works great. The one trick that I use when purchasing used parts on eBay is, of course, make sure that the seller has a good rating, but also take a really good look at the pictures. I mean, really study them to make sure that the card that you're buying is clean and doesn't have any physical damage. Now, if the seller doesn't have any pictures or just a couple of really bad ones, then don't buy it. Trust me, there's plenty on the market to get a good deal. You don't have to jump on the first card you see. In fact, this was not the first one I saw. I looked at probably 10 or more different cards before deciding on this one. I went with this one because, first of all, I'm a huge EGVA fan. I'm actually kind of sad that they don't make GPUs anymore. And secondly, the seller had lots of really good pictures, and I was able to see all around the card and see that it was in excellent shape. And now that I see it in person, it's absolutely clean. But if you've been keeping track so far, you know that our grand total is $801. We're just $1 over our budget. But if you went with the 16 gig memory kit instead of the 32 that I did, then you'd be sitting comfortably under $800 at about $770. That should leave you plenty of money to buy a license for Windows 11 from today's sponsor and still stay under $800. But none of this matters if it's not a good gaming system. I mean, we're not building the system just to play games. We're building the system to play games very well. We don't want minimum settings here. We want games to run well at their higher settings. So, to find out if we achieve that, we need to build this thing and see how it performs. Now, normally I would go through this whole build process, but I've done that tons of times with you before. So, today, we're just going to build it and we'll get on with the benchmarks. So I picked a wide range of benchmarks to put this system through to show what its true capabilities are, at least as best as I could. I tried to include games from each genre, but if I missed your favorite game, then hopefully I benchmark one that comes kind of close to it. Also, I just have to note real quick that during my testing, all I had available for this system was this 1080p 144Hz monitor. So the benchmarks are all in 1080p. But as you'll see from the benchmarks, the results that this system gave make it very capable of running at higher resolutions. So let's get into it. Now, the first game we're looking at today is Black Mesa. This is a remake of Half-Life 1 using the Half-Life 2 engine. I included this game to cover what kind of performance you can expect from older games. However, if all you ever play is older titles, then this is probably way more system than you need. But with that said, we got an average FPS of 294.7. Like I said, this system is going to be able to play older games very well. I didn't stop there though, because we also got a 1% low of 207.3 and a 0.1% low of 179.5. This system didn't even have to try to play this game. Also, this benchmark was done with all the settings set as high as possible. The next game we're looking at is Counter-Strike 2. This should do a great job of covering the FPS genre, being that it's one of the most popular FPS games on the market. Our average frame rate in Counter-Strike 2 was 233.7. We also got a 1% low of 109.4 and a 0.1% low of 60.7. I've noticed I'm getting really low frame timings in Counter-Strike 2, at least in the last few times I've benchmarked it. Since this isn't isolated to this system specifically, I think it has something to do with driver optimization. Hopefully it'll get better, but even with the performance we got, it was very playable. But let me know down in the comments below if you're getting bad frame timings in Counter-Strike 2. I'm kind of curious what other people are seeing. Also, like before, this game was also benchmarked with the highest settings possible. The next game we're looking at is Cyberpunk 2077. Since this game is kind of a resource hog, it should give us a good idea of how the system will perform with really resource-intensive games. Our average frame rate in Cyberpunk was 72.6. We also got a 1% low of 57.3 and a 0.1% low of 49.7. Now, as with the other games, so far, we've gone over, this was not played on minimum settings. This had RTX enabled and was set to high. It also used DLSS in order to get these numbers. I gotta say, 72 FPS with high settings in Cyberpunk is pretty impressive. It also looked great. The next game we're looking at is Red Dead Redemption 2. This should do a pretty good job of covering the open world game genre. We got an average FPS of 92.1. We also got a 1% low of 74.5 and a 0.1% low of 53.4. Now, this benchmark was done with the settings on high and in some cases ultra with DLSS enabled and set to quality. If I played around with the settings a little bit, I could probably get a much higher frame rate. But the point of this video was to build a system that could play these games at high settings. So that's what I did. The next game I'm looking at is Shadow of the Tomb Raider, primarily because this game is gorgeous and it's kind of in a genre of its own. Or I don't know what Shadow of the Tomb Raider's genre would be. Let me know down below if you know of a specific genre this game would be classified in. We got an average frame rate of 179.2. We also got a 1% low of 155 with a 0.1% low of 125.7. As with all the other games, the settings were set to high, and I also turned on RTX shadows and DLSS set to quality. I think this is the fastest I've ever benchmarked Shadow of the Tomb Raider. It ran very well and looked spectacular. Now, ever since I started this channel, I've always included GTA 5 in my benchmarks, and I tested it on this system and planned on including it. The reason I chose not to this time is, unfortunately, GTA 5 has an issue on high-spec systems. The Rage engine gets really unstable over 100 FPS. This system definitely ran GTA 5 at over 100 FPS. In fact, I think our average was closer to 200 FPS. But what happened in GTA 5 at high frame rates is the frame timings absolutely tank. And I think my 0.1% low was like 7 FPS. The way you typically fix this problem is by turning on VSync. Now, with a 144 Hz monitor, GTA 5 ran very smooth at 144 FPS. Unfortunately, that makes for kind of boring benchmarks because it was literally stuck at 144 FPS. So because of that, I left out GTA 5. But with that said, I think we achieved our goal. We built a very competent gaming system and we kept it under $800. Well, kind of. Anyway, also throughout all of these benchmarks, we were absolutely GPU bound. The GPU stayed in the 90s in every single one of these benchmarks, and most of the time was pegged at 100%, while the CPU chilled between 30 to 50%. So that means this system has room to grow. Not only is it an AM5 based system, so you'll have lots of processor upgrade options in the future, but this platform could easily support a GPU upgrade later on down the line. In fact, to be honest with you, the only complaint that I have, other than the fact that I should have went with the RGB case instead of this one, is that the cooler that came with the Ryzen 5 is, in my opinion, just barely able to keep up with the CPU. Now, just to be fair, I'm accustomed to running a water-cooled system, and that's exactly what's going to happen to this one once this video is over. But the CPU throughout all of my testing stayed pretty close to 80 degrees. In fact, it idled at 50. My Ryzen 5 5600 in my current system idles pretty comfortably around 30 C. So if you were to build this system, it might be worth going with the 7600X and adding an aftermarket cooler. But with that said, the way it's currently configured, it runs pretty well. And I'm extremely happy with this build. I'm so happy that I'm gonna gut my system and this is gonna be my new one. However, I haven't decided yet if I'm gonna do a video on that because honestly, I've actually done a video on water cooling before and didn't get many views. So let me know in the comments below if that's something you'd like to see. Otherwise, in the meantime, check out this video where I bent the hard tubing for my current build because that's essentially all that water cooling this one would be anyway. But as always, you guys have a great day.